It's the end of the day with Ray. Man, I am super excited. I got Jay McBain. Jay McBain, I got to be honest with you, folks. There's no better analyst in that IT services space than Jay McBain. He's the principal analyst over at Forrester's. Jay, how are you doing? It's so great to have you on the end of the day with Ray, man.
I am doing great, and thanks so much for having me. I'm a big fan of the show.
Well, I got to be honest with you, Jay. You know, you live in that IT space. You know, I've spent a lot of time in this print industry, and a lot of those guys and gals are trying to get into that IT space. And I watch how they're doing it, and I just want to, sometimes scratch my head really hard. But I thought I'd bring you on today just to, get some questions answered. And I want to make sure that my friends in the imaging channel, one, know who the hell you are, because if you don't, you need to pay attention to what he writes. Jay's a prolific writer. He's got some great analysis out there, and he's one of those analysts that doesn't just tell you what you want to hear to make you feel good. He'll definitely tell you what you need to hear, and sometimes that's a little disturbing for people. But the only way we're going to grow is if we're willing to accept what we need to learn. So, Jay, let me ask you right out of the bat here. I just recently read where Salesforce went out and bought a company called Tenium. Did I say that right?
You did.
Okay. And, they're pretty much an RMM tool. And then we had Apple. Apple goes out there and buys FleetSmith, another RMM tool. Are we seeing these huge enterprise companies coming into the SMB space, and are they going to take away MSP's customers?
We've seen this actually. There's a couple of recent examples. We've seen this for over a decade, where large companies are buying into either managed services or to remote management tools and things. And you've seen Microsoft do this in the past. You saw IBM do this in the past. Dell had done this in the past. And you could go across most of the Fortune 100 tech vendors have bought into RMM at some point. It adds to part of their stack, but it never ends up replacing the channel that it's meant to compete with. It ends up in some cases solidifying for customers or certifying that this is, a real thing. So it ends up helping partners on one side. And in the end, as we trace these 5 or 10 years later, it never becomes, part of the business model. I think it's an extension to the services. You look at Apple, which is quickly becoming a services business. This is a good technology extension to what they do, but it doesn't replace at all the managed services or the broader IT services that the industry provides the customer.
Well, that's good to know, I guess, especially for those MSPs. You did a speech one time, and it was interesting. You talked a little bit about the managed service providers and those business models, and it kind of was familiar to me as I look inside the imaging channel. There's really a lot of older guys and gals running these companies. We don't have a lot of young blood in there, and where does all this go into the future? We noticed that, if you look in the print world today, with the pandemic, the digitalization process of the SMB is definitely ramped up. I think it's by 5 years. Those digitalization processes, even for MSPs and some of the things that they provide, may lose to some of the organizations going direct to end users. But how do you think this plays in with the age of some of these MSPs? And are we going to have a consolidation and some of these people just go evaporate out of the market?
Yeah, there's multiple layers to that question, but the first is demographics. We knew that when we did the research of the 50,000 MSPs around the world, and you can do your own research. Once COVID is over, you go to an event again, look left and look right. Those people sitting around you. We did our research, and the average age was in the late 50s of the owner principal. And we knew this if you look backwards. The first IBM PC came out August the 12th, 1981. Many MSPs started off as VARs back in the day in the 80s. They built their businesses basically around IBM or Compaq, maybe later on in the early 90s around Microsoft. But if they did that as a teenager, if they did that right after college or when they did that, you fast forward 39 years and there you go. This is a lot of that audience. Microsoft has 355,000 partners around the world today. Many of them started in the early 90s. So yeah, there is a demographic shift. CompTIA, the biggest association in the world around IT, did a survey, and they found that 40% of the entire audience is going to retire in the next 4 or 5 years. I think COVID and a few other things have delayed that a little bit, but you do have an aging factor. There is another piece of research that says millennials will be the majority of channel partners within 3 years. So we are going through a demographic shift. We're going through a firmographic shift, changing business models and how they go to market. You are seeing M&A activities increase. There's a website, channel e2e.com. Joe Panettiere specializes in this and reports on the activity every day and looks at the private equity companies that are doing these roll-ups, what the financials are behind it and everything else. So really fascinating. And yeah, we are going through a degree of consolidation and price compression because managed services is 20 years old as an industry, obviously maturing. But because of SMB and because the world is so decentralized, when you look at the different buyers, different sub-industries, which is there's 297 of, you look at the different geographies, state by state, province by province, city by city, you look at the sector, segment, and size, SMB itself has like 10 segments of different types of buyers inside the sectors and segments there. And then there's 26 layers of the tech stack. You know, we were talking earlier about managed print, but there's Pro AV and there's telecom and obviously all of the security and hardware and software and services. And you could break those 26 categories down into 200 subcategories as well. So if I multiply all that together, there's 35 million conversations around technology going on every day out there in the world. And so in that market, it isn't sized to have one or two big players like Apple or Dell or HP or IBM or Salesforce or one of these big players cover that marketplace. It is very much hyper-local, and we're always going to have millions of players, which is the number today, around the world in all the 16 different business models that feed into this global channel.
That's pretty amazing, and it gives you a lot of hope too. But I think when there's consolidation or when there's an evolutionary event, obviously was what this pandemic is, causes industries to really look at themselves from within. But obviously, if there's oversupply versus demand, and we can clean up some of the supply, we can raise the price because we're less demand. So I think that's an upswing in all this. I think MSPs that focus on delivering what I think is Gary Pica calls the chocolate cake, but that Paul Dipple type model. But people that deliver that really robust IT services have a great future because they can't really be commoditized in that. What are you seeing? What are you seeing around the security deliverable? Because a lot of my friends in the imaging channel, they think if the printer's secure, they're in IT security. Just joking a little bit, but in all reality, that is its own deliverable. There's people making a lot of money in that. But what do you see that in the future for the security provider?
Well, security is obviously huge. It's one of the fastest growing areas before COVID. Now COVID has really changed the games. There's a new topology here in terms of the network with everyone working at home. And, even post-COVID, 70 to 80% of people, may return, but it's not going to be the same future of work that we're thinking about earlier in the year before this pandemic hit. So every time there's been a topology shift in the market, there's been a huge opportunity for the channel. Think back to going into client server. This created the entire managed services industry. It created most of the VARs and managed service providers. The value of their organizations today was around client server. When we shifted about 10 years ago into the cloud, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud environments, another huge shift in topology, a huge set of value offerings that came out of that. And an ecosystem was built, 175,000 SaaS companies, for example, hundreds of thousands now of infrastructure consultants and brokers and aggregators. And there's 800,000 emerging tech companies around IoT and AI and automation and blockchain. So all that was built and really in the last 20 years, but accelerated in the last 10. So now we're into this third topology. So you have people at home today on a consumer notebook, going through a consumer network to a consumer router, trying to get access to enterprise-grade data. So the 7 elements of security, you've got obviously device or endpoint security, physical security. You're now in a house and sharing a line with your neighbors on your cable modem. You're obviously web security, data security, all of the different layers, application security within there. This new topology creates mystery. Mystery creates margin for the channel. And when we interviewed hundreds of thousands of clients during COVID saying, you've frozen everything, but where are you going to start to open up dollars in the summertime? And, of the 4 areas they said, 1 was automation, 2 was cloud acceleration, 3 was security. It's the risk, it's the compliance, it's the continuity, and the new threat vectors around security. 3rd biggest opportunity. By the way, 4th was customer experience, employee experience, e-commerce, marketplaces, really changing their business model as well. But obviously top of mind for customers and a growth area. Given everything else is declining during COVID, upwards of 17%, it's anything that's flat or slightly growing is a bright spot.
Well, that's pretty fantastic. I got to be honest with you. My friends, you heard, he didn't say print was one of the things these thousands of people that you interviewed are really concerned about. So that's something to take home. But Jay, I gotta, where do our friends go to really understand more about you? I'll put a link, obviously to your profile on this video. But I think it's important that the imaging channel, especially the leaders inside that space, really start looking hard in the IT space, and they need to start talking to different people than the people they were talking to. I know you're a Paul Dipple fan, as I am, and I know that you have, your own opinions about the space and about these resellers. But let me ask you a question. If I was a copier dealer, let's just say that I'm $25 million, I don't do IT at all, or whatever I do, I probably need to blow up and start over anyway. What would be your advice to me?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, Paul Dipple is very quantified, and I tend to be quantified as well in terms of measuring the marketplace, measuring the channel, and what your question was, measuring what the opportunities are and, what I would do to my business, to kind of future-proof it, given where we are with COVID, where we are until recovery, till mid-2021, and then onwards. If I had a 3 to 5 year plan, the first and foremost is I wouldn't just become a managed service provider. This whole idea of, I'm going to create all these IT services and, start charging $113 per month per device and go compete with Larry across the street, head to head and drive that, price to zero. Not where I want to go. What I want to do is add more layers of the onion above what I do today. So what is the broader conversation beyond print into document management? What's the broader conversation into how business output happens and communication happens? And what is this, conversation which your clients might be having at a higher level? At the board level or at the C level, they might be thinking about what the future of their business is. Accenture just did a survey, and 76% of CEOs across the world in every industry are thinking that their current business model will be unrecognizable in 5 years. So you need to be part of those conversations. Where does their business model go as they convert to subscription, as they may be becoming technology companies themselves? You're going to be an integral part in terms of how the workflow happens, how the business logic, how all of the processes get worked. What we call transformation, which are these big $1 million projects that nobody's working on right now because nobody has the money to do that. But this isn't Accenture, Deloitte type of stuff. It's very tactical, it's very specific, and again, it's a range above what you already do.
Well, I got to be honest with you. Hopefully they're taking your advice. Maybe they'll reach out to you. Jay, I want to have you on again, and I really appreciate your time. It's always good to look inside that window where everybody's trying to get out and get into. And I think some of them need to pay attention to folks like you. So I really appreciate your time. Is there anything you want to say before I end this?
Oh, well, thank you for having me. And I'm glad to, kind of come back and share some of the observations. Again, we're out talking to partners every day. We're out talking to vendors. We're out talking to customers, most importantly, where what they're thinking, not only in the next couple of months, but in the next couple of years. Well, so happy to share. And obviously the impact on managed print, the print environment, the office equipment, copier businesses, all of those are integral to the future of business and how this works and what the buyers are thinking. If you break it down again into industry opportunities or geographic or segment or sector active opportunities, a lot going on here. And I think a lot that, the channel can pick up in terms of, coming out of this much stronger than we went in.
Well, hey, I appreciate your time, and like I said, I hope they reach out to you because I think you're a wealth of information. My friends, I'm going to end this the way I always do. Status quo is the killer of all that will be invented. Don't get stuck in status quo, and I'll see y'all tomorrow.